Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you've watched some of my other videos, you may have seen this sitting in the background. This is my 2005 Kubota ZD21 diesel zero-turn mower. And I've had it for about 2 years now. It was another Craigslist purchase. I bought it with about 1,800 hours on it for $1,500 because the mower deck gearbox was bad. So I had it rebuilt for about $750, and the tractor has been really good since then. These are really good commercial tractors. So when this was new in 2005, it was probably a $25,000 tractor, and to buy a new one now is roughly 30-ish. So I've got about 4 in it with everything I've done to it, and it's been a great tractor. They still go for $7,500, $8,000. It's in really nice shape for the age of it, and considering most of these end up in commercial fleets and get beat to hell. Now, one thing to keep in mind, if you own an older Kubota tractor, whether it's a zero-turn or a regular tractor, if it didn't originally come with a roll hoop, you can go through a program with Kubota to retrofit older tractors with a roll hoop. So when I bought this, it did not have a roll hoop, and the only reason I wanted one is so I could put a sunshade on it. The rollover protection, I really didn't care about that. I mow flat ground, so that wasn't a concern. But if you go to Kubota's website, I'll try to find a link to it. I forget what their program is called, but they will retrofit your tractor. So this one, they didn't have any in stock, so they special made a one-off, or not a one-off, but a build-to-order roll hoop for my tractor. Sent it to the local dealer, and for, I think it was $350. That included the roll hoop, the seat belt, installing the roll hoop, and also fixing a hydraulic leak. So for $350, that's nothing. And now I've got my sunshade. But anyway, the purpose of this video today is to talk about maintenance. So the previous owner, he did a whole bunch of maintenance about 25 hours before the gearbox went bad. So I wanted to go through and do the oil change, oil and filter, the air filter, transmission fluid, transmission filter, and also cleaning the strainer. Now, if you own one of these or you are looking at getting one, the Achilles heel to these older ZDs is the gearbox on the PTO, or the gearbox on the mower deck, and the hydrostatic transmissions. So the gearbox, the manual calls for a replacement of the lower seal every 2 years, and 99% of people don't do it. The seal goes bad, the gear oil drains out of it, and it destroys the gearbox, and that's what happened here. So check your gearbox. You can get underneath. So if you get the deck up in the air and pull the center blade off, you can pull the cup off that's below the gearbox, and if it's full of oil, it's definitely leaking. Or you can check the fluid level, make sure it has fluid in it, and preemptively replace the seal to try to mitigate that, because if you can find a gearbox, it's probably a good $1,500 to find a new one. I had a machine shop rebuild mine. Like I said, it was about $750, and it was only that expensive because when the gears were destroyed, it took out the bearings, which took out a chunk of the case, so they had to weld up a piece of the case and then mill it back down so that everything could go back together. So that's the first Achilles heel to these. The second is the transmissions, which on these early tractors, they did not like being on side slopes. So if you ran it on a side slope, if you ran it on a side slope one way or the other, it would slosh the transmission fluid away from the hydrostatic discs, and it would burn up the transmissions. So the fix was to do one of two things. So the dealer could either retrofit an auxiliary oil tank to these to give it more capacity, or most of the time you just overfill the transmission a little bit. And when I talked to the dealer before I bought this, I asked him about retrofitting it, and he said, well, being as old as it is, if it's still running, I wouldn't bother with it. Just overfill the transmission and leave it alone. So that's what I'm going to do here. So now I've only had really one issue with the tractor since I've had it and been running it, and that is the seat sensor. So I had an issue where I was mowing and it would start to sputter and then shut itself off, and it would immediately restart, and I could mow a few more passes, it would stutter and then shut off again. And it seemed to mimic a fuel delivery problem. Being a diesel, you only need two things, compression and fuel, and it should run. And the way it was acting, it seemed like it was getting starved for fuel. So the fuel pumps are pretty robust and they're really expensive, so I wanted to do the cheaper stuff first. So I replaced both of the fuel filters, and I also pulled the tank off, which is behind this tire, and flushed it out, and a bunch of garbage came out of it, so I thought that was the issue. It was just plugging up the pickup at the bottom of the tank. So I mowed a few days, it seemed to be fine, and then it just started acting up again. And I fought that issue for probably 2 months before I finally fixed it. And the last time I mowed with it before I fixed it, it sputtered and stopped like usual, except this time when I went to start it, it wouldn't do anything. So the control panel beside the seat would light up and nothing with the key, so it seemed like a safety switch. So you have to have the emergency brake pushed down and be sitting on the seat and it'll start. So I had the foot brake on and I held the key on and hopped on the seat a few times and it started. So this whole time, months of troubleshooting what I thought were mechanical issues turned out to be a stupid electrical switch in the seat. So instead of pissing around with that, I just bypassed it. It plugs in, and you won't be able to see it, but it plugs in up under the frame. So I just unplugged it, jumpered it out, and it's been perfectly fine since then. So again, back to maintenance. Now these are super easy to work on, and it's pretty interesting. It's a pretty interesting layout. So the engine is the same engine that's in a normal tractor. It's the D782 3-cylinder Kubota diesels, and it's oriented in the same way as a normal tractor, radiator to the front. But what's interesting is that you have the flywheel in the back, which isn't attached to anything. It's just kind of along for the ride, and everything is driven off of the crank in the front. You can see, hopefully you can see, there's a fan, a cooling fan that goes to the transmission, and there's a shaft that comes out of it that goes to the engine, and that's driven off of the crank. So it's completely backwards, but it works and has plenty of power. I can mow some pretty tall and pretty nasty stuff, and it doesn't really bog it down. And I can mow, I've got about 5 acres, I can mow it 3 times on a tank of fuel. So it's a pretty good tractor. Now in the 2 years that I've owned it, I have done a little bit of maintenance, and that was last spring. So it was getting a little bit warm. It had never overheated, but it was getting warmer than it should when I would mow high grass and high temperatures. So I went ahead and flushed the cooling system, replaced the fan belt, and I think that was it. So that's all I've done. And the coolant was original. I'm guessing it was pretty brown and nasty, and I flushed it probably 10-12 times before it was coming out pretty clear. And after I did that, it's been running fine. No overheating. Even on high temperature days, it still stays well below the middle. But I'm going to get it up on some ramps. It's the easiest way to do it. Just back it up on some car ramps and then jack up the front of it so it's level when I go to refill everything. And like a normal car, just drain it and refill it. Swap the filters. So here's everything I ordered. So the tractor should take 2 gallons of UDT transmission fluid, but to overfill the transmission and the gearboxes a little bit, I needed some more, so I just bought another gallon of it, just so I know that I have plenty. Then I've got the Kubota 10W30 engine oil, a new transmission filter and oil filter, and a new air filter. So I ordered all of that from Messick's, and I think it was like 130 bucks. No, it was more like 150-ish bucks shipped. But it only needs to be serviced about every 200 hours. And then if you have the owner's manual, if you're lucky enough to still have an owner's manual for it, it outlines really well how to do any service on the tractor. Got rear axles, engine oil. Then up here farther, you've got all the capacities and intervals. So it's a really well done owner's manual, and it tells you all the grease points in here too. So definitely something to hang on to. Well, now that it's up on the ramp, we can get a better look underneath of what's going on. So obviously the engine is above us. We've got the oil drain plug right there. Got one fuel filter there. On the bottom of the transmission, so right there, we've got a drain plug. Same on this side. The fill is on the top side of it. We've got the transmission here with the drain on the bottom, the filter above it. Looks a little oily on the side of the transmission. Where it's oily, that's where the strainer is. And you're supposed to periodically replace the O-rings when you take the strainer out to clean it. So I bought new O-rings with the kit, so I'm going to replace it, and hopefully it'll take care of that leak. Yeah, that's pretty much all we have to deal with. And then once it's done, just grease up some of these joints while I'm under here. Everything else looks okay. I don't see any leaks anywhere. But it shouldn't be too bad. Everything's pretty much in the open. Alright, I'm going to do the transmission. So I've got the front end jacked up. You can jack it up on the frame. It's not a big deal. To where it's level, and then I'll just come in and drain everything out. Replace the O-rings on the strainer and clean the strainer. And put it back together and fill it up. The only one that's kind of a pain is down in here is the fill port for the left side transmission, or gearbox as they call it. So I'll have to, hopefully I've got a funnel that's long enough to get down in there. And real quick, I just want to show, this is what the strainer looks like once you've unscrewed it from the side of the transmission. You can see it there. So the piece that's hanging is the suction hose. So I'll clean it up. Clean the screen off. There really wasn't much on it. Let's just clean it off real quick and then put it back in. I've got the plugs back in, and I had a funnel that was long enough and thin enough to get down into the transmission, so that'll work pretty well. So 2 quarts each of UDT for the transmission gearboxes, and then 3.4 quarts for the main transmission. Well, it's not pouring oil out of it, so that's a plus. I'll keep an eye on the plugs as I mow a few times, make sure they're not leaking. I'll let it sit for a few minutes and then check the fluid. In the meantime, I'll go around and grease everything. And I see my seat has pretty much bit the dust. I've been looking to get a new suspension seat for it anyway. This one doesn't have much suspension to it. And it looks like the plywood is kind of rotted out and it's fallen off. So, add that to the list. So the grease points on this are in general pretty easy to get to. You've got one on the pivot of the caster and the wheel. And you've got one on each spindle on each end. The one in the center is lubricated by the gearbox, and then the tensioner has a grease fitting on it. It's on the other side. The shaft for the transmission, it has, I think, 3 on it, and I think that's about it. There really aren't that many grease points on it. There's no grease points on any of the linkage. So yeah, just one over here, and then right back there, the tensioner has one, and also on top of this pulley here has one. Oh, and the drive shaft has a few up here that go, the one that goes from the transmission to the mower deck gearbox. There's a few on it. It's really not too hard to get to, especially when it's up in the air like this and you can let the deck drop. So the only other thing I have left to do is the air filter cartridge. That's pretty easy. Just a couple snap pins, and those come off. Cap slides off the end. Filter pulls out. It's pretty dirty, and the new one just slides in. So now with this service, it should be good for about 200 hours. So thanks for watching. Check out some of my other videos.